Good morning.
Morning.
I'm really tickled to be talking today because I love this subject so much. I was introduced to this woman, not personally, but her, about 3 years ago, and I cannot remember how I found out about her, but I was just fascinated by her, and so I've been wanting to give this talk for 3 years now. So I'm glad somebody finally gave me the opportunity to do it. I hope I'm ready for it. In 1860, before the Civil War had begun, a baby was born in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, to a family that had 5 girls. So they were wanting a boy. So the baby was born and it was another girl. And they had names picked out for boys. And a friend of theirs, a couple was there visiting and said, well, you should go ahead and name her a boy's name. And that man and woman's name was William and Ann. And so they named her William Ann. And that went along for a while. And when she was about 6 years old, she saw a street sign that said Allen. It was a beautiful sign. It was gilded. And it was a 6-year-old, you know. It was so pretty. I doubt she was like that, though. She was never like that. But she loved that name, and she said, oh, that's so neat. I'm going to take that name. So she is Will Allen Drumgoole for the rest of her life. She was baptized with that name in the Methodist church there in Murfreesboro that they attended. Her father was the mayor, and during the Civil War, instead of surrendering to the Yankees, he decided not to do that. And because of that, he and several of the aldermen were put in prison. And he had to pay a $10,000 fine to get out of prison. That was a lot of money back then, $10,000. While the war was going on, and after the Yankees had overtaken Murfreesboro, he helped to negotiate with them for the members of the city, the citizens of the city, to try to get as much as he could for them. All of his crops were taken, and of course they had slaves, and they were let go. So he basically lost his fortune. But at the age of 16, Will Allen graduated from the Clarksville Female Academy in Clarksville, Tennessee. And later on she studied in Boston. She studied expression. There's a lot of confusion about that, but supposedly that's what she studied. Preview. Okay. As she grew older, she developed traits in keeping with her masculine appellation. Her father was a persistent hunter and fisher, and she became his constant companion. She is an expert with rod and gun and does not know what fear means. Her hunting costume is of gray corduroy, such as the mountaineers wear, and the short skirt reaches just to the top of the boy's boots, with which she covers her little feet. She was only 4'10" and tiny. Tiny, tiny, tiny. That is from She Bears a Masculine Name, a Girl of the Tennessee Mountains Who Writes Entertaining. As a young adult, her father had lost his fortune during the war, and so she had to take on some of the financial responsibility as soon as her mother died. She did. And her mother had talked to her about writing when she was a little girl, so she decided she would try writing. And at the age of 23, she was hired as Tennessee Senate assistant engrossing clerk. Now, what's an engrossing clerk? Karen, do you know what an engrossing clerk is? Well, I'm going to tell you what an engrossing clerk is. Engrossing clerk is the one that is in charge of overseeing the bills while they are in the House and the Senate, and after they're signed before they go into law. Who knew? And they make sure that they're written correctly, that there are no other laws that they conflict with, or if they do, then they figure out what should be done about that. And they basically handle them moving back and forth from one place to another. Well, so she was hired as the assistant grossing clerk at the age of 23. In '84, her mother died, and she began her writing career. In '85, she was elected in grossing clerk. Now, she was 25 at this date. And she was re-elected in '87. In '86, she published her first novel. She was 26 years old. The Sunny Side of the Cumberland, and they said it was a sentimental novel. I'm not really exactly sure what that means, but I think it was probably pretty syrupy. That's my phrase. And she also won a prize for a short story about the then Governor Bob somebody. Bob Taylor. And she won a prize for that of $250, and that was in 1886. In 1887, she was re-elected as the engrossing clerk, and she also purchased the Yellowhammer's Nest, which is was in Estill Springs, which her family had had for years, but had to sell when her father lost their fortune during the Civil War. But she has now got a regular job, and she has bought it back again. And she is 27. The Evening News in San Jose wrote on September the 20th, published on September the 20th, 1989. Ms. Will Allen Drumgoole, says report, is a literary lady who has cut her official throat with her little pen. Some of her recent magazine sketches of life in the Tennessee mountains carried a sting to the denizens of that section. And when Ms. Drumgoole recently sought an election to a Senate clerkship, a big, rough-bearded Ceylon, I don't know if that's his name or what but anyway, from an upcountry arose and roared, "She rode again the mountains, I would be numbs again it, and I'm again her." The Senate sat petrified, and Ms. Drumgoole incautiously giggled. It sealed her fate. Another Hill Country legislator was hoisted to his feet by his indignant colleagues to second the objection. He did it tersely and effectually. She allowed the women folks went barefoot, and the men talked a dialect. I'm again anybody as is again the mountains. The issue was joined, and on the ballot being taken, Ms. Drumgoole was beaten. So that was the end of her job in the Senate. She had written about the Melungeons in East Tennessee. I could run on forever, telling you of these queer people who are part of us, have a voice in our politics and a right to our consideration. They are a blot on the state. They are ignorant of the very letters of the alphabet, and defiant, or worse, ignorant of the very first principles of morality and cleanliness. It is no sensational picture I have drawn. It is hard truth, hard to believe and hard to understand. They are within 5 miles of one of the prettiest county seats in Tennessee. In politics, they are Republican to a man, but sell their votes for 50 cents and consider themselves well paid. They are great charmers and herb doctors. I have a string of blood beads I bought of an old squaw, who assured me they would heal all ailments of the blood. They are totally unlike the native Tennessee mountaineer, unlike him in every way. The mountaineer is liberal, trustful, and open. The Melungeon wants pay, not much, but something, for the slightest favor. He is curious and suspicious and given to lying and stealing things unknown among the native mountaineers. That was published in the Nashville Daily American. So, hence, no more Senate work. But she continued to write, started a column called Will Allen's Journal, a literary society weekly, which she published in Nashville for several years. In '91, she traveled to Texas, where she taught and wrote 4 newspapers. In '92, she wrote and published Christmas Eve at the Corner Grocery, based on the little grocery on the corner of East Main Street and Manny in Murfreesboro. A couple of years later, back in Texas, she founded the Waco's Women's Press Club. Waco's Women's Press Club. I don't know if there was one anywhere then. There must have been in New York or something that she would be able to model it after, but nonetheless. Up in the Cumberland foothills, Ms. Drumgould has a pleasant cottage where she and her father, as chummy as ever, spend their time from April to November every year. The father is now 88 years of age, but is still an expert angler, and many a day the pair of them walk 10 miles in pursuit of their outdoor pastime. Ms. Drumgould christened her cottage the Den, but her neighbors call it the Yellowhammer's Nest. Her study there is decorated with the skins of animals which she and her father have shot, and the floor is carpeted with similar spoils of the chase. The walls are decorated with pipes and walking sticks, gifts from admiring mountaineers. Each of the sticks commemorates a story, and some of them are handsomely carved. For carving is a natural gift of these strange, shy people who Miss Drumgould has actually, as well as artistically, made her own. From She Bears a Masculine Name, a girl in the Tennessee mountains who writes entertaining fiction in March of '94. So the Yellowhammer Nest became a place of renown. This is a picture of it. Supposedly when she lived there, I have another one that has an addition to it, but when she lived there it didn't have an addition. As you go to Estill Springs nowadays, you pass a traffic light, the first traffic light, and if you're going from Tullahoma, and just down a little ways there's a road that goes to the left and one that goes to the right. The one that goes to the right went back up to where her little cabin was, and it sits up on a hill, and if you don't turn there, you go on, you see that little church that sits down in the hole there. Well, that's where the cabin sat, up there looking off that hillside. It became a place of renown, and she brought friends and invited guests frequently. The railroad station was across the highway. Now, after you leave that traffic light going to Estill, going to Winchester, on the left where the big blue house is, the railroad track was on the ground there. It wasn't elevated like it is now. And that's where the train stopped. I always thought it was downtown Estill Springs, but it wasn't. It was right there. And there was a hotel there, so I assume that was maybe downtown at that time. But they would get off the train, walk down that little drive across the road and up the hill to her house. And I thought it was interesting. I don't think I mentioned this later on, but I read somewhere that it didn't have cooking facilities, and so there was a colored family that lived just over the way that would bring their meals all the time. And I wondered about that. I just think that's kind of weird, but anyway. This is the experience of a local Estill Springs person upon visiting her house one time. I had the pleasure of being of the receiving party this summer when Ms. Drumgould entertained the Tennessee Press and Authors Club, distinguished politicians, railroad representatives, and staff members from the great daily papers of Knoxville, Chattanooga, Memphis, and Nashville, with many editors from the papers of smaller towns. I think that is so wild that they would all come to this little cabin there in Estill Springs. The cottage was a fete. A rug carpet covered the floor of Miss Drumgould's study. Bird's nest, horseshoes, fish nets, etc. adorned the walls. On the back porch, a long towel hung on a roller. I assume it's one of those towels that rolled. I don't know. On a shelf was a tin pan. Nearby, a cedar bucket with fresh spring water. Under the oak trees on the lawn, a table was spread. The decoration were ferns, mosses, and wildflowers. And this was 1904, so I can just imagine what this would have been like. At either end, the hospitable board was a barbecue pig on either end. Two pigs, which I guess the colored family prepared for, I don't know. At either end was a barbecue pig, which was served with hoe cakes, buttermilk, watercress, mountain ham, etc. Under a wild grapevine on a stump stood a large gourd from which the guests drank lemonade in small gourds. At least they had their own gourd, I guess. I don't know, maybe not. Underneath a pear tree, half buried in a hollow stump, which showed the inscription "Moonshine," cut in bark, was a keg of delicious wine made from native grapes. Two little darkies, you have read of them in a blue china bowl, that's a story that she wrote, kept off the flies with peach tree limbs, after the manner of country folk. An orchestra played Negro melodies and sang corn songs, which I don't know what corn songs are. Anybody know what corn songs are? Bill?
Never heard of corn.
The guests joining in the chorus in gay abandonment of conventionality. The souvenirs were tiny horseshoes made at the red blacksmith shop by the farrier of the story. There was a story about a farrier. I think it was the farrier's dog was the name of it. They were presented while the toast sparkled around the jovial board and the laughter of voices echoed through the woods. Out of the compliment to Mayor W.J. Thomas, who had tendered a private car for the occasion, Ms. Drumgool's toast was the railroad and its riders. I mean, I just think that would just be fascinating to go to something like that. Anyway, I think her life would make a wonderful movie. There were also two Drumgool literary societies. There was one at the State Teachers College, which was MTSU, which is now MTSU, and it was one of the largest on campus. They had over 100 members. They had debate clubs and people that would go out and speak about, and I know that she lectured there because she lectured everywhere on different subjects. Shortly after the United States entered World War I in 1917, she volunteered her services to the U.S. Navy, and in May was recruited as a yeoman warrant officer. That's really not true. They didn't have warrant officers, women warrant officers at that time, but that's what the quote said. Perhaps the first female to serve in this capacity. She was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, where her official responsibilities include working at the base library, recruiting young men into the Navy, visiting ships, and delivering patriotic speeches. She was 54 years old when she did this. Like other authors of her period, she frequently included moral themes in her work, such as charity, religious faith, and the duty of the individual to make the way easier for those to follow. From Drumgool, a Rutherford original published in the Daily News Journal in Murfreesboro in '09. It seems to me, after reading and studying her so much, that she, after making the mistake of writing about the Melungeons, which people today don't see that as that much of a mistake because they've learned so much about them from what she wrote. She went and stayed with them, she stayed with a family for several days and then stayed with other people and traveled around. And they see that as anthropological information. Is that the right word? Anyway. So she used her talents to teach and entertain. She never married. she traveled widely in the eastern part of the United States and Texas. She was in Texas a lot. In New Orleans, she gave a lecture on the coming women's suffrage movement to a high school, a girls' high school. And even today, she is making a huge impact on people. My online research showed that there are articles referencing the bridge, the poem, as recently as December. And on the Tennessee Historical Society website, her article was last updated on March of this year. So she is still considered an important writer, and she wrote over 7,000 poems. She worked for the Nashville Banner from, I think it was 1894 until her death in 34. It wasn't quite 30 years, it was like 29 and a half. Her biggest claim of fame, though, was the poem The Bridge Builder. In Estill Springs, there is a little commemoration to her that is right down the hill from where the Yellowhammer's nest was. And I just think it's so sad that this has fell into such disrepair. This is a writing about her, which I finally deciphered most of it. And but it's got a piece of plastic over it, which on the inside has been covered with mold. But you can see where a snail or something has crawled around eating the mold, but didn't quite get all of it. And then this is, I think that's the whole poem. Yeah, this is the whole poem that is her biggest claim to fame. And this is a little bridge that I believe is probably about where the bridge was when her father died. And I'll read the poem in a moment, but I wanted to set it up with this article from the Franklin County Historical Review that was published in December of '72. These things are so interesting. I pulled out looking for this article and I kept finding ones that I wanted to read. But anyway, this was from an interview of a woman that was published in the Arkansas School Journal. My father and I were great chums, companions of the woods and the streams about my little summer cabin in Estill Springs in the Cumberland foothills. When he was 90 years of age, we were walking one day to the creek to look for our minnow traps. The path led through a bit of wood, and there before me stretched a freshly cleared, pretty footpath. The stones were heaped to either side, and the path lay all clear and clean before us. When my father said, "I made this path," I stood aghast. At his age, I had scant hope of traveling that woodland with him another summer. In fact, I felt pretty sure he would never walk it again. I said to him, "You did all this? When?" "Just finished it last evening," he said proudly. My heart hurt me. He had taken all that trouble to make a path he would probably never walk again. Then the thought came to me, but I shall. My father made this path for me. I wrote Rare Old Chums, a book of 100 pages, and into it I put the verses. But the little bridge underneath, which flows the stream in which we hid our trap, seemed to me more forceful than a path for what I had wanted to say. And so I chose the bridge at the foot of my hill, where sings a lonely little stream. And this is, I believe, where the path is, where the bridge probably was, because through history, you know, it's not like they go, "Oh, that bridge is old, we'll just go build one somewhere else." They fix that bridge, and then they fix it again, and they fix it again, And I think this is probably about where it was. If you go across it, there's a path that divides, and one side would go up to where they lived, but it's very overgrown now. And so the poem, The Bridge Builder by Will Allen Drumgoole. An old man going alone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast and deep and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim the sullen stream that had no fear for him. But he turned when safe on the other side and built a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near, you're wasting strength with building here. Your journey will end with the ending day. You never again will pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build you this bridge at the evening tide? The builder lifted his old gray head. Good friend, in the path I have come, he said, there followeth after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This chasm that has been naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I am building this bridge for him. There are a lot of organizations today that use that poem in talking about how their organization is about building a bridge for those to come. And over the Connecticut River between New Hampshire and Vermont is a bridge that has that last paragraph on it in a plaque. And I just think it's fascinating that this little bitty woman that, just wasn't going to stop at anything. It's almost like when people would say no, she didn't even hear it and just kept on going. Didn't even say to them, oh, I'm going to do it. She just ignored them and kept on going. And I was just really fascinated by her. I probably didn't do it justice, but thank you very much for your attention.